This is the recent interview with Nick Gillespie. My guest today is Jonah Goldberg. He's the editor-in-chief of The Dispatch, and he is a 20-year LA Times columnist, CNN contributor, two-time New York Times bestseller, creator of National Review Online, and I suspect by the end of this interview you will be a self-declared libertarian. Jonah Goldberg, thanks for talking to Reason.
It's great to be here, Nick. It's always fun to hear you return to your proselytizing ways.
Oh, yes.
So.
One never knows when the mustard seed will bloom, right?
Yeah. I'm more like Zeno's arrow, right? Zeno's arrow
yes.
always gets closer and closer, but I'm just never quite getting going full libertarian.
It's there on the horizon. But one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you, particularly over, in this moment, and we had scheduled this before the Iran war started, but you have been, and people at the Dispatch, which, and correct me if I'm wrong, started and launched fully early in 2020, and it's part of a remnant group of Weekly Standard people, as well as other conservatives like yourself who left National Review. And you've been a strong critic of Donald Trump and of the kind of direction of both the conservative movement or parts of it and the Republican Party. So it's very good to be talking to you right now.
It's great to be here. I mean, I could quibble. I don't think it's of much interest about some of the description. I think we really launched 2019, and we don't see ourselves as just sort of like Japanese soldiers keeping the flame of the Weekly Standard and National Review alive. We've kind of broadened our ambit a bit, but we still are definitely center right. But we have some center left types who are great contributing, writers on our masthead. So
yeah. So you're talking about somebody like Jesse Singal, I'm assuming.
Jesse Singal, Jeremiah Johnson. Also,
not to be confused with the Robert Redford movie.
I've made all the jokes already on that.
Yeah, and he is, but he kind of is. He's kind of a wild man out in the frontier, living his best life. So.
He is, and also we have a slice of the great Meghan McArdle.
That's right.
Very happy to have.
Yeah. So a libertarian-ish, if not full-blown libertarian, writing for the Washington Post, married to Reason's own Peter Suderman. And when not to quibble with your quibble, my understanding is that the Dispatch soft launched in late 2019 and fully opened in 2020. But
that's fair. I guess that's fair. Yeah. We it was a blur back then.
And your your podcast, which you've continued for many years, is The Remnant. So. Yes. I don't mean to say, it's interesting. We can talk about this. Let's do that a little bit at the end of, do you see yourself as part of a remnant that is, hunkering around the flame of conservatism and trying to keep it alive until the winds die down and it can come out in its full glory? It doesn't seem to me like that's what you're doing at all. You're making a large scale, you're fighting a ground war. You're not hunkering down somewhere.
Yeah.
But let's start with Iran and Trump and kind of the question of process. The last LA Times column that you wrote, which is from about a week ago or so, you start by saying, I really hate the Islamic Republic of Iran, and you would like to see it gone. But things matter and process matters. If you need to have Congress behind you, if you're declaring a full-scale war, you need to make the case to the American people. How do you feel as we speak, we're 2.5-3 days into this? What's your sense of Iran?
Yeah, so I have a lot of cognitive dissonance on this. I stand by everything I wrote insofar as I think it is absolutely obvious that Trump should have made a case, should have gone to Congress. And I got to say, I think this gets kind of lost in a lot of this debate. It's not so much that he should have gone to Congress, which he should have.
Yeah.
It's that Congress should have demanded that he come to them.
Yeah.
Right? That's the whole point. So much of our system doesn't work when you have essentially a parliament of eunuchs in the form of Congress. Right. And it is not a new story to say presidents don't want to go to Congress, The new story here is Congress absolutely refusing to assert its prerogatives. So I think he should have done that for all sorts of reasons, including for his own benefit, right? If this goes tits up, which I think we'll both agree, we might put the percentage odds differently, but I think we'll both agree is a very live possibility that this could go really badly.
Right.
He's got no political allies that don't have an early exit ramp. I mean, even Tom Cotton could say, hey, look, I wasn't in charge of this. He didn't, I didn't have to vote on this.
Yeah,
he didn't ask. Yeah. And so, like, there's a political argument for it, which the founders appreciated, which is that it's sort of like the way I always try to explain to people is amending the Constitution is really hard, not just because the founders didn't want the Constitution to be amended a bunch, but what they also want is that when it was amended, there was a lot of buy-in, right? Because everyone had to debate and argue about it vertically and horizontally across the system. There's been none of that. And so I do think this so far is a war. I have friends on the right who say it's not really a war. No, it's a war. Like when you take out the supreme leader of another country, that's an act of war. And I think it's a lawless war, and I think it's an unconstitutional war. The cognitive dissonance comes from the fact that, like, I also think it's a good thing that Khamenei is dead, and that it would be a really wonderful thing if this whole thing were successful.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of downside to it too, because it just further entrenches the precedent that we're not a republic if Congress doesn't have to approve a war.
And there's, within a couple of hours, Trump had originally said the reason we did this was to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, and that they had imminent, threats from Iran were imminent against the U.S. or attacks or the possibility of that. A couple of hours later, literally, he said, the main reason was to decapitate the regime.
Right.
We don't have a good record when you're not even sure why you're going in, and you change the rationale or the top number one reason a couple of times within a few hours of invading. And again, to your point, that's if there had been a discussion in Congress, and Congress really needs to force it. But, all of this stuff would be kind of ironed out a little bit. So we would have a sense of what are the actual goals and then how might you approach them.
Right.
So do you think this is this Trump doing something, radically different than a Biden or an Obama or a Bill Clinton? One of the stories that I read recently from Axios, this is apparently the 7th country that Trump has bombed or sent military people to. It reminded me that Bill Clinton was actually very fast to dispatch troops or to do military actions. Typically, they were very small and minor and things like that. But is this something new that Trump is doing, or is he continuing in the tradition of many presidents before him? And should we care about that?
To a certain extent, I think it's new insofar as differences of degree become differences of kind, right? I mean, let's put it this way. All presidents have lied, but the scale of lying with Trump is different, right? All presidents, I don't want to say all presidents, but a lot of presidents have had one eye on their personal economic interests, but this is different. And so you can go down a long list like that. I think, my friend Eli Lake was the first one to point this out. There's that great essay on bullshit by Harry Frankfurt. Mm-hmm. And I think the difference is we've had lots of presidents who lied. But as Frankfurt points out, lying pays tribute to the truth, right? There is inherently in it, there is this thing that says, I know what the truth is. I acknowledge what the truth is. I want you to believe something else. Bullshit does not care what the truth is. And I think that that's sort of the essence of Donald Trump, going back to his days as a condo salesman. He just says whatever he has to say to get through the moment. And I think that, you're absolutely right about the ever-changing rationales for Iran, but his entire first year as a president has been about pretexts. He says he's doing something for this reason, but then once he does it, he says it's for another reason. And if in the process, he changes the reasons why he's doing things. I'm doing tariffs to reindustrialize America, but I'm also doing tariffs because the prime minister of Switzerland, which is not a person who exists, was rude to me. That kind of thing. he says we're fighting the drug war off Venezuela, and it's all about interdicting drugs. And then when he does the decapitation thing in Venezuela, all of a sudden it's about getting the oil, right?
Right.
And so that's, I think, in a very serious way, the difference of degree on a whole bunch of fronts. Clinton and Obama would never have taken out the supreme leader. I mean, technically Israel did it, but but for America, it wouldn't have happened. And I think that those guys, Obama's whole foreign policy was about keeping the problems of the world at bay so he could focus on domestic stuff. I think a lot of the Trump stuff is focusing on the foreign policy stuff to distract from domestic stuff. And
which was certainly a Bill Clinton hallmark as well. I mean,
sure.
Two of his major foreign policy, bombing campaigns started when Monica Lewinsky was testifying and when various other domestic news came out. But there
was a lot of doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, or doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. But I just think that Trump is also trying to once Trump leaves office, either for constitutional or actuarial reasons, his name is coming off the Kennedy Center and a lot of other things, right? If he actually liberates, which is big if, Iran, that's not going away just because he's no longer in office. And I think that's part of what's going on there.
Yeah. Do you think when it comes to MAGA, and I'm not even sure exactly what that is, other than Trump's most diehard fans, is it clear that they are leader based, that it's just they love him and they'll follow him to hell or to heaven or wherever, but there's really no core policy or decision matrix or set of principles that the Trump MAGA movement represents?
I think that's generally right. There are some flavors, some themes, right? Some directions that I think apply to pretty much all of MAGA. Anti-globalism, anti-international institutions, that kind of stuff. Being a dick to your enemies, I think, is a vibe that is really, really important.
Being in favor of whole milk seems to be very much near the top of the pyramid.
That's moving in, manliness, push-ups, that kind of thing. But look, it shouldn't shock anybody that a movement built as a cult of personality would not have an inherent policy core, particularly when the personality at the center of the cult does not have an inherent consistent policy vision, right? I mean, Trump, I've been saying this now, I have receipts going back to 2015 that any intellectual who hitches their wagon to Trump thinking that he's their guy will eventually face a choice. Either repudiate what Trump is doing or repudiate their coherent worldview to stay with Trump, because he offers the only safe harbor he's ever offered is blind loyalty to him. And I think that system, I guess, is what we were originally going to talk about, is starting to come apart.
Yeah.
I don't, to the extent the MAGA coalition was ever a coherent thing, and I don't think it really was, it's now balkanizing pretty obviously.
Well, let's talk a bit about that, because that LA Times article, I think the headline, realize you're not necessarily responsible for that, but it's like, it was something like the world may be ready to not bend to Trump's knee anymore. And on one level, that seems to be right. On another, we are now, a nation at war. And, it's quite possible that Iran is going to rally around, a common enemy, and the U.S. is going to rally around a common enemy. But who are the people, take somebody like J.D. Vance, right? The vice president who, over the past weekend, it's just been an endless stream, and anybody can go to Twitter and find all of the things where J.D. Vance, a couple of years ago to 10 years ago, was just denouncing Donald Trump and everything that Trump seemed to stand for. What do you do with somebody like J.D. Vance? Is he one of the examples of a person who has clearly hitched his wagon to MAGA and to Trump, and is now being forced on an almost daily basis to eat his words from 15 minutes ago?
Well, one, yes. I mean, let's just be fair. I am not a big fan of J.D. Vance.
Right.
But eating giant bowls of feces handed to you by the president is the job of vice president and has been since time immemorial, or at least since we amended the Constitution.
It's moved on from warm spit to giant
Yes.
bowls of feces. Yeah.
To something that rhymes with spit.
Yeah.
And that said, it was instructive. You know, yesterday there was this video came out from Vance. We're recording on Monday. That said, look, I understand why people don't like foreign wars, which is kind of his spiel these days, right? His shtick was, I know we're tired of the forever wars and the foreign wars, but you have to understand all the previous presidents who did that were dumb, right? And Donald Trump isn't. And this is a refrain that Vance has trotted out before when he was at a TPUSA thing and someone said that American government is bought and paid for by Israel or something like that. He said, well, you know, if that was true in the past, we know it's not true with this president, right? And so that's the only safe harbor for Vance, is to say, put your faith in this prince, because he can't offer a coherent argument that both reconciles his past statements with what Trump is doing, but also works to keep his slice of the coalition in his column. And that's going to be the case for another, 3 years.
Do you think, how big part of the conservative movement, and you've been in the conservative movement your entire professional life, how big a part of that does MAGA or Trump represent? And, is he at 30%? Is he at 60%? What happens when Trump ends, one way or the other?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are different questions going on there. The polling people, the psephologists, the people who look hard at the numbers, everyone I've ever talked to basically says there's like between 28 and 35% of the GOP electorate is MAGA, right? And that the reason why it's a little indeterminate is that we have witnessed in the last 10 years the demographics of both parties really rapidly change. And so what it means to be MAGA is kind of a moving target at times. But I think there are people who won't, let's call it a third, who just won't abandon him no matter what, right? Who won't tell pollster he's doing anything wrong, that they love his Musk, all that kind of stuff, lowercase m.
Yeah.
And, but it's really important. I mean, I don't think this coalition lasts. I think the movement by TPUSA and these sorts of groups to rally around Vance, they already endorsed Vance, right? The absolute, let me just, as a brief parenthesis, let me ask you a question. Can you, with your encyclopedic knowledge of American culture and institutions, and having been around for a very long time,
Thank you.
Can you think of?
Yeah.
Seriously, can you
I'm
think?
old. I get it. Thank you.
Can you think of an analog or anything remotely similar to the way in which Kevin Roberts has destroyed the credibility and mission of the Heritage Foundation in such a short period of time, right? I keep asking people this because I'm fascinated by it, but it's certainly without precedent in Washington. But anyway, back to the question at hand. So I think the reason why some forces are aligning with Vance is more a sign of weakness than of strength. That they recognize that the coalition is just not a majority, and that, and so they are trying to scare away internal competitors early. They're terrified of Rubio for all sorts of things. But I mean, the punditry aside, there's also just the simple fact that, look, I mean, I bring this up all over the place, but only 2 times in American history since 1800 has a sitting vice president been elected straight to the presidency, right? Is Martin Van Buren in 1832, where he had the advantage of running against like 4 or 5 Whig candidates and was running with Andrew Jackson at his, as his guy. And then George H.W. Bush running for a third Reagan term against that sex Michael Dukakis, right? Yeah. So the only scenarios in which it makes sense that a vice president would win a third term or, would win on the heels of his president as if that president was popular, and like Trump has a huge ceiling.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so back to the central question. There are people who joined the MAGA movement because they just like to see the world burn. There are people who joined it because they just like Trump's celebrity and think he's funny. There are people who are like Robert F. Kennedy, make health great again people. And there are serious anti-Semites. There are serious nationalists. There are serious post-liberals. I mean, their actual numbers on the ground are very low. But all these different, and there are some serious racists. And then there are just some serious people who, or just some decent people who just like Trump and like the change and all the rest, and are like the populist spirit of it all. Those people, that the idea that somehow there is a mantle, my friend Ross Douthat has been talking about how Trump will pass a mantle as if it's like the one ring that rules them all.
Right.
I just think that's like utterly unpersuasive. Like Trump's endorsement matters, but it doesn't mean everything, and it doesn't mean that people, low propensity voters that got off the couch to vote for Trump, will get off the couch to vote for Vance or Rubio or anybody just because Trump told them to.
Hey, Reason Interview listeners, robots are coming for our jobs. Can you compete? Are you or someone you care about wondering how to stay relevant as artificial intelligence reshapes work, careers, and opportunity? Reliance College invites students and young professionals to AI Proof U, a new multi-module intensive certificate program focused on building the human skills that machines can't replace: judgment, independent thinking, clear communication, leadership, entrepreneurial initiative. AI Proof U begins with a 3-day in-person intensive meeting in Austin, Texas. From there, participants continue with 6 weeks of guided virtual seminars, and the program concludes with a 3-day in-person capstone in Chicago. This isn't a coding boot camp or tool training course. AI Proof U teaches participants how to think, decide, and lead in an AI-driven world. The next cohort begins March 20th. Robots are coming for your job. Can you compete? Discover the education built for the age of AI. To learn more and apply, visit reliancecollege.org/AI. That's reliancecollege.org/AI. And now, back to the Reason Interview. I mean, people had trouble getting off the couch to vote for Obama a second time, and he seemed to be much more positively viewed and accepted. Describe a little bit your dislike of Vance, because Vance is in many ways a repudiation of, the type of conservatism that you have often talked about in your career, both at National Review and at the Dispatch. What is it about Vance that particularly gets under your skin?
The whorishness, I think, for one. I think he's very smart. But I think he wears his resentments on his sleeve in obvious ways. I think I would put it this way. I don't think Vance is a Nazi. I don't think he's a racist per se.
I'm looking forward to the but.
That was a huge one coming.
Yeah.
Right? But you know how there's this thing that you've seen a lot of over the last 10 years where you get more normal conservatives and Republicans who say they're not necessarily pro-Trump, they're just anti-Trump, right? Which is sort of a gateway to Trumpism for a lot of people. But regardless, it's just like, I love him for his enemies, but yeah, he's kind of a fool and all that kind of stuff. Vance is at the forefront of what I would call and have called the anti-Nazi wing, right? It's not so much that he agrees with Nick Fuentes or he loves everything that Tucker Carlson's doing, but he'll be damned if he'll tolerate excessive criticism or any attempt to silence or cancel these people, right? He exerts more effort defending people making how many Jews can fit in a Volkswagen ashtray jokes than he does his own wife or anything else. And so part of, I think his political analysis is wrong on this. I think it's a bad move on his part. But first of all, the fact that he thinks it's a smart move terrifies me because it shows you how much of this crap is in the GOP coalition. But second, if he thinks this is true, if he does think that there is this sort of fifth column of, American Purpose or whatever these groups are, I shouldn't say American Purpose, I think that's a different group, but there are a bunch of these little sort of 20-something Hitler Youth wannabe posers that he needs to pander to these people. If he actually thinks that he does need to pander to the people and is actually making that moral choice to do so rather than denounce them, then that is just the complete triumph of political appetite and ambition over any sense of morality and decency. I can wave away his private text to a friend saying that Trump might be America's Hitler, but because I think that was hyperbole among friends and yada yada yada. Rushing to defend what Tucker is doing with the Holocaust denial stuff and all that, rushing to defend playing footsie with Nick Fuentes, rushing to defend what he called a bunch of kids in chat rooms, when in fact these were like grown people,
20 and 30-year-old staffers,
some were staffers,
politicians.
Yeah, one was a elected politician, right? To exert all the energy to defend all of that, while at the same time saying every past president of the United States was dumb, to say that all of the other people were corrupt and do all the cult of personality bullshit. And I don't think he's nearly as good a politician as people think he is. And so I'm a deep skeptic. That doesn't mean I don't think he's a front runner for the nomination, but that's a
where does Vance come intellectually? Because he is not a dummy. He's read books, this type of thing. Where is he coming from intellectually? Because there's part of within the conservative movement, there's been this push towards redefining Americans as heritage Americans, which means Scotch-Irish Americans.
Yeah.
And
which I also think is horseshit and terrible.
Absolutely. Yeah. But part of that is like, I don't give a shit about anything, but if you make fun of my friend, I'm going to back them and attack you. Mm-hmm. But so there's part of that, and to use his, titular term, part of it is a hillbilly feuding mentality that Vance channels opportunistically, but intellectually, he's also he's announced a lot of post-liberal kind of ideas. He's talked about how, conservatives, the big problem is that conservatives, when they're in power, they refuse to be as unprincipled as he claims liberals or progressives are, and that's got to stop. He dislikes, at various points, he sounds like the grandson of Louis Brandeis, who grew up a little bit down the Ohio River from Vance in Louisville, Kentucky. Where do you think he's coming from intellectually, and where does that tradition sit within the broader conservative movement?
Yeah, so I've been talking about this for a very long time. I think one of the problems that I helped contribute to was what I've called, and I don't necessarily mean it's all about Saul Alinsky, but I mean this type of thinking, a kind of Saul Alinsky envy, right? When 15 years ago, when I was writing about Saul Alinsky, I thought he was a bad guy. Because he was a sort of nearest weapons at hand, do whatever you can to achieve power, right? Sort of Gramscian kind of stuff. And I helped I wasn't the biggest or most important by any stretch, but like I helped incept this sort of critique into the right. And what happened?
And this was the idea that Saul Alinsky, a community organizer, I guess based in Chicago, best known for Rules for Radicals, was like, here's a game plan from the far left to insinuate yourself in power, particularly through liberal kind of machine politics and whatnot, to get what you want. Right. You and it was not just you. A lot of people on the right and some people on the left were like, yeah, this was the game plan that was being used by various things. And you're saying Vance and people like him are saying, oh, you know what, this is a pretty good toolkit. And like, Antonio Gramsci and the Long March Through the Institutions, like, we can be the parade leaders as well.
Yeah. So I mean, the evolution I'm talking about is there are these people who saw Saul Alinsky as sort of a demon figure on the left, but they convinced themselves as part of this asinine notion that we've had a culture war now for a while now, where each side is convinced the other side wins every battle, which is like just logically ridiculous. So they convinced themselves that the right always loses because they are Alinskyites. And remember, Obama was sort of connected to Alinsky, and so was, and Hillary Clinton wrote her thesis on it. So like that was part of the connect the dots that I was part of. But I never gave up on the idea that Alinsky's tactics of smearing people just to discredit, the other side, all that kind of stuff, I always thought that was bad. And then at some point, some switch flipped in the minds of a lot of people on the right, in part partly to justify Trump in 2016 with the "but he fights" stuff. They convinced themselves that no, using power for the good guys without
Yeah.
without constraint or without procedural limits, without reference to sort of democratic or liberal, small L liberal norms,
Mm-hmm.
that's good because we're the good guys, right?
Right.
And that it sort of had the logic of the cancer cell and flipped a whole bunch of people. I mean, like I still love Marco Rubio saying, he had this op-ed a few years ago saying that he was in favor. He changed his mind on industrial policy. He's in favor of it now, but just done right? Because the idea was that, and there's the same thing that Sohrab Ahmari and some of the Catholic integralist guys had. I don't know where Sohrab is today on his journey, but for a while he was making the argument that, social engineering can work. It just has to work with the right people, with the right post-liberal integralist Catholic, mullahs in charge. And that this is the thing that just drives me crazy is what the right is quickly becoming is not an alternative to left illiberalism, but a right-wing version of left illiberalism as they internalize the same understandings of how power works. And that's where I think Vance comes from.
Yeah. And how, people, when we're talking about Catholic integralists and post liberalism, this brings up people like Patrick Deneen and whatnot. Do you feel like they are actually powerful within the conservative movement or politics more broadly? Because there, and this is where, libertarians for the most part, and there are some libertarians who were like, whatever Trump does is fine because we have to burn everything down. And then let things lay fallow for a while and something good will come up. But mostly, there are a lot of people on the right and the left who are no longer talking about any kind of principle. They are just saying, we need power. Every election is the Flight 93 election.
Right.
If we do not win the next election, there won't be any elections left. Both the right and the left have said that in recent memory. Um, is the post-liberal right, a major part of the conservative movement?
So I'm going to do some annoying intellectual hair splitting here. I think it is a major part of the right. I just don't think it's particularly conservative. And what I mean by that is, look, I'm less and less. I still think right and left have utility as terms, but less so than I used
What
to
is
think.
that? Yeah, what broadly, what is it? Broadly, what's the biggest definition of right versus left?
In some ways, I would say it has more to do with direction, right? Insofar as the left still tends to see its utopia in the future, and thinks that they can spring forth from reason and will, right, and that kind of stuff. And you can design societies from scratch that satisfy all the Rawlsian veil of ignorance bullshit and all that. And I think the right still finds uh, its inspiration in the past, and then for a lot of politics flow from that. Right, you're not getting any people on the left saying, except for maybe some really weird Greens, but you're basically not getting anybody from the left saying, we were better off when a bunch of us were serfs. But you're getting more and more on that on the right. But my point is, look, I mean, at National Review, this was always a distinction that mattered, is that NR always saw itself in part as sort of like the Texas Rangers on the frontier. It's like, this far is our territory of conservatism, and beyond here are the badlands of craziness, right? And so that we would always be attacked from VDare because we weren't, I know this is weird to you and some of your
Yeah,
friends, but we weren't anti-immigrant enough for
right.
VDare and that crowd. And so
Yeah.
I think, there have been, by my count, depending on how you count, 4 or 5 new rights in the last 150 years. The latest new right um, rejects anything that smells even slightly of Burkeanism, and embraces radicalism. And I'm with Samuel Huntington on this, which is that that conservatism and radicalism are, as a matter of logic, antipodal. You can't want to conserve and tear everything down. It just doesn't work. One's a brake pedal, one's a gas pedal. And so I think there are a lot of people on the right who are very right wing, but their respect for institutions, their respect for the Constitution, their respect for norms, basic decency, and all that kind of stuff has gone out the window, which is why I don't think they're necessarily conservative.
Right. And that also explains why they love Trump. I mean, Trump is the personification of that impulse. What do you do with somebody like Tucker Carlson? And I assume over the years you know him, you
Sure.
hung around with him. I was talking to somebody a couple weeks ago. I was a semi-regular on his MSNBC show, and this was before MSNBC had gone to a kind of orthodox left-wing kind of progressive thing. And I remember he had me on, and he would pit me against people like Phyllis Schlafly, and occasionally Pat Buchanan would sit in because he had a show either before or after Tucker. And Tucker, there's an old Reason video, a talk show I did with Michael Moynihan, now of the Fifth Column, where Tucker was he was an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, and he was going on explaining why he's so libertarian. Tucker Carlson now believes in demons. He believes in a spirit filled world where Satan is alive and well, seems to believe in the rapture, believes that, hummus eaters, conspired to kill not just Jesus, but possibly Charlie Kirk. He is in fever swamp upon fever swamp and more popular than he has ever been. How does he fit into the new right? And also, can you explain, do you have any psychological insight into what is going on with Tucker Carlson?
So I gotta say, it was I liked my job so much better when the question I got asked the most was, "What's Charles Krauthammer really like?"
Yeah.
Now I get, "Can you explain what's going on with Tucker?" 3 times a week from a podcast host or journalist or whatever. I haven't read the Jason Zengerle book, but I did talk to him for it. I knew Tucker pretty well. He was a neighbor of mine for a long time. Um, I always liked Tucker. I think you characterize his journey well. I'll start with the end of the question first. I think that part of what was going on, I do not have a monocausal theory of Tucker, but I think an important part of what's happened with Tucker is that uh, uh, my friend Yuval Levin is the guy who first made this argument to me, which is that cynicism is very hard to sustain. Right? Think about it in terms of Trump. How many people did we know who said, "I'm holding my nose and voting for Trump," who then 6 months later think he was just a genius beyond mortal ken? Right? People don't like to think that they're actually like the lesser evil. They don't like to think that their heroes are bad people, because the whole point of them being heroes is they're supposed to not be bad people. And for Tucker, he has a long history of doing things for cynical, mercenary financial reasons, for also sort of, Joker, just want to see the world burn reasons, that kind of stuff. But he does it fully knowing that what he's doing is bullshit. And then he gets criticized for it, and something kicks in that says, "Screw you, no, I actually believe that." Right? And he then convinces himself, it's a weird ratchet effect, that he goes into it unprincipled and then becomes a principled defender of his unprincipled thing. And so I think that's part of what has happened to him. I mean, one of the stories you heard a lot back when I was at Fox was that when he got that primetime show, he resolved to do everything that he could to beat Hannity in the ratings just because he hated Hannity so much. So it wasn't like some great philosophical thing. It was purely competitive thing. And I think that that's a big part of his mode, is he's just a very competitive guy, and he's like, and he hates his enemies. I think a big chunk of his twisting in the, his heel turn on Israel has to do with wanting to punish Bill Kristol for things. I mean, I think there's a lot of that kind of petty weirdness going on.
Also adjacent to the Tucker turn, and this is also true somewhat to J.D. Vance, although Vance, converted to Catholicism. So, and there's a real tension between a kind of fundamentalist Christian and a Catholic integralist model that, I grew up Catholic, and I remember when Catholics and Protestants were primary opponents of one another, and
Hmm.
they were jockeying to see who had a better relationship with Jews. Now it's anybody who is religious is all on the same side, and they're attacking everybody. But the differences between a Catholic integralist and a evangelical Christian, those will come to bear if this happens more. How do you, in your kind of current, post at the Dispatch, how do you feel about the religiosity, the open religiosity of different forces saying, you know, there is one true God. And this was on display at the Charlie Kirk Memorial, which was much more like a evangelical rally than it was, anything else really. Are you comfortable with that? And, the Dispatch, I know Steve Hayes is a good kind of mainline Protestant Christian, and you have Jews on staff, you have Catholics who are not, who do not want the, Vatican, Opus Dei to be dictating the moral codes of America. What's going on in the conservative movement towards that type of religiosity?
Yeah, so I'm less concerned about the Opus Dei part. It's the marriage. I mean, we're now seeing this weird, which like Protestant nationalism. I mean, you know this stuff as well as I do. Protestant nationalism, there is a peanut butter and jelly, they kind of go together thing to it, going back to Henry VIII, right? It's the whole point of nations breaking from the mother church and all that. Catholic nationalism has got a real oxymoronic vibe to it, right? um, and we're seeing some of that racist conspiratorial goober Jack Posobiec,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
he now has like this image of he's also big. Posobiec is really into heritage Americans too,
Yeah.
but he's got
Which,
like
yeah, but and we'll let people kind of, Google Posobiec and,
that's right,
when did the first Posobiec's show up in America? And it's
right.
probably sometime around 1910.
Yeah, I'm Jack Posobiec of the Mayflower Posobiec's, and
Yes.
and but he's got this. There was this thing that was going around, this meme of him holding up an upraised fist, and it's
Yeah.
amazing how much that again. This is like lefty cosplay that
Hmm.
is infatuated so much with the right, with his rosary bead,
Right.
special rosary bead bracelet on, and this is this is something you and I talked about a long time ago, but like one of my one of the takeaways I got from Julian Benda's Treason of the Intellectuals or Treason of the Clerics is um, the way you can tell somebody is betraying Christianity for politics is when they start using arguments like Jesus was the first socialist or Jesus was the first eugenicist, right? Um, and we're getting a lot of this. That there's that former Miss World, Miss USA contestant, Prejean, who was on
Yeah.
the White
Hmm.
House Religion Council, um, who basically has now just gone full Nick Fuentes anti-Semitic, which he was like floating on the panel. And if you look, she speaks with all of this authority as a Catholic, and she keeps saying, "As a Catholic, this is my faith, and I must bear witness." The bear witness thing is kind of weird for the Catholic part, but anyway, that's a different point. And she converted last year, and what I see a lot of, as you know, I mean, you used to criticize, I think sometimes unfairly, National Review for its Catholicism, but I spent a lot of my career around very passionate, committed Catholics, married one, and I I find the bigger problem are with the recent Catholic converts that has less to do with their religious. I mean, I'm just here speaking in broad brushstrokes about the sociology of it. It is the people who are craving orthodoxy and who convert and then all of a sudden become experts on Catholicism and what the church really stands for, and don't really care what people who've been Catholics their entire lives have to say about any of this stuff. I do not like the Christian nationalism stuff. I do not like um, uh, a lot of the religiosity. I am much more comfortable than a lot of people with public displays of religiosity. Um, I just find it very difficult to square with um, the idea that it's all coming from um, places of sincere religious faith and are not, in fact, masks and Trojan horses for a kind of, sort of nationalist populist politics. And that's where I see most of it. I'm a fan of Russell Moore. David French was at the Dispatch for many years. I have no problem with evangelicals and evangelicals being in politics. I have no problem with Catholics and Catholics being in politics. I have problems with people doing a Mott and Bailey thing where they kind of pretend that their position is derived purely from religion, when in fact they're using their religion to as a screen to push a political agenda that is not consonant with it. I mean, Jesus Christ did not preach stuff like heritage Americans,
right? Or heritage Judeans, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think? And this is something I've noticed, and I want to talk a little bit about the kind of borderland between libertarians and conservatives. I feel like part of what a lot of younger people, and this seems to be particularly true of men more than women, but that might just be the people who tend to speak to me, that they look at something like Catholicism in particular, or Orthodox Christianity, or sometimes Orthodox Judaism, and they say, you know what, libertarianism in particular, and I think there's a kind of beltway version of conservatism, using cartoon terms here, that also fits this description, where it's like, your ideology or your worldview, like you say, okay, well, what is great is that you have a lot of room to develop whatever world you want to live in, whatever community you want to live in. You can build the company you want. You can marry who you want. You can redesign yourself, using somebody like our mutual friend, Ron Bailey, like self-directed evolution. What is great about America is that you have so much freedom to become whoever it is you want to be, for how long you want to be that, as long as you're not hurting other people. And a lot of younger people seem to say, I am living in a world where I feel like a giant leaf blower is constantly pushing me off the planet. I have nothing to grab onto, and nobody cares about my background. Nobody cares about my story or my struggles. And so I'm going to latch on to something like a J.D. Vance style Catholicism. Rod Dreher, who is somebody who we both know and have at various points intersected with, had a version of this. Like, you need a thick religion or social structure that gives you a place to hold on to and says, yes, you are valuable for who you are, no matter what. Do you think part of the turn to this kind of mixing of religion and politics, and saying religion needs to start dictating more of life, is answering, what life is like for people who feel like they have been cast aside in terms of economic innovation, globalization, not cultural fragmentation per se, but just kind of cultural mongrelization, where nobody cares anymore that you are the J.D. Vances of Northern Kentucky or anything like that?
To a certain extent, let's put it this way. I'm very sympathetic to the way you characterize it. And I think there's a real there. I have long believed that the pursuit of happiness is an individual right, but it's best realized in groups. And for a group to have any real meaning, as an institution, as an organization, as an association, whatever label you want to put on it, there needs to be some stickiness to it. There needs to be a filter that says this group is for these kinds of people, but not those kinds of people. Now, I think we can't do that about race for all sorts of obvious reasons, and shouldn't do it about race. But I have a higher degree of, it's sort of like your talk about, a utopia of utopias, right? Because no one idea of a utopia is going to work for everybody. For some people, being a Marine is like a prison sentence. It's just contrary to everything they ever want to do. And for other people, being a Marine is a way they can realize their true best selves, and it's the perfect vision for them, right? Those are just different people.
Yeah.
There's not like one is more right than the other. It's just the different people. And a society that has a thick ecosystem of institutions and associations is going to, just by a matter of logic, have more niches for more people to be happy. And I think largely because of technology, but not only technology, we have been dismantling or destroying a lot of those kinds of niches. They've been cleared away. One of the reasons, Robert Nisbet used to point this out. He's like, look, the late 19th century was this golden age of institution formation, all of these different civic groups, but no one formed an institution purely because institutions are good. Institutions are tools. They're to do something, right? The institution of barn raising for the Amish is to literally build something.
But they're not just like, hey, we're really good at this, and we're going to shift from raising barns to doing those little fireplace things for the, you'll recall from Fox News when they would advertise the Amish built fireplace mantle and things like that.
And so it's like, it's like at Reason Magazine, you guys have a great office culture and esprit de corps, but you put out a product, right? Yeah. There's a point to the institution. Technology has, particularly communications, the phone, iPhone, has allowed people to withdraw from institutions because they don't need other people to deliver the things that they want as much. And then you add in, I think, easy access to porn is turning us Japanese in all sorts of ways. It's really bad for young people. But you can go down a long list of things. But at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of people who feel like they don't have a home. They don't have a group. And I think the left has some serious blame it is not all the evil in a society where you have a culture war mentality where one side takes all of its cues in an oppositional way from the other side. What one side does affects the other side. And the riot of anti-white bullshit, the whiteness studies and all this kind of stuff, the demonization of white people, that helped create the world in which J.D. Vance can say to a room full of white kids, you don't have to be you don't have to apologize for being white anymore. I thought that statement was gross, but there's a reason why it resonates with people. And
you did not grow up thinking of and not to get into a massive argument, you did not grow up thinking of yourself as white, right?
No, I never said it. Well, as a white person, I kind of think X.
Yeah, and in a New York context, but also in all sorts of places, like you grow up, you're Jewish, you're Italian, you're Irish, you're Polish, you're Puerto Rican and Chinese. I mean, so I think your point is taken, and I think I would like to talk a little bit about how the left they have been destructive of certain kinds of institutions or identities which do change over time and kind of serve new needs, which is to provide people with a sense of self and community and continuity. Do you feel like the left is in a similar place as the right now? Like Kamala Harris is not going, if she's the nominee, she's not going to be president. Nobody is going into the streets for Gavin Newsom. I mean, the Democratic Party, the liberal movement broadly, maybe the progressive movement is in better shape, but none of these people seem to be like overbrimming with popular positive visions of the future either. Are they in a similar position as, broadly the conservative movement?
They're in a similar position, but not a symmetrical one, right? I mean, so I do think one of the problems that, let's just say the left, progressives, whatever you want label you want to put on, because they've over time become the party of the unchurched, right? They're the party that is sort of like, not to put too much of a, not just for the sake of argument, this is sort of where I come from. They think the government should do the things that God would do if God existed, right? It is this sort of God state view of the government being the driver of all good things. and this is a attitude that goes back to the Wilson administration. It's
Sure.
been cultivated
No,
over
and
time, right?
Zoran Mamdani, the new mayor of New York, said almost explicitly that, where there was like no concern too small for the government and the warmth of collectivism to kind of come in with the emergency blanket.
So the problem is, as a matter of sociology, other than the universities and a few, like sort of NGO type kind of things, there is no, like, the right has this ecosystem of churches and other associations that it does draw forms of identity from. The progressive movement exists to organize, to use government towards ends that they desire. And when you're out of power, that creates a real sense of we're in the wilderness kind of thing, because they don't have a lot of other narratives to fall back on, given the sort of philosophical animosity towards civil society, notions of civil society. I mean, remember Hillary Clinton's definition of civil society was, she said it was the term political scientists use for the things we all do together, which is just not what civil society is. And Barack Obama liked to say government is the one thing that we all do together, right? Is this cult of unity married to state power kind of thing. And the fact that Trump and these people that they consider to be demonic have taken over power, I think creates a real identity crisis sociologically and psychologically for a lot of people on the left, that they don't know how, like, they assumed that it's really interesting. If you go back and look, for a very long time, there was this assumption that if everybody voted, if you turned on all the lumpen proletariat that were hiding in the nooks and crannies and the marginalized society, Democrats would never lose an election. And there were only two groups that believed this: Democrats and Republicans. And so Republicans wanted to make it a little more difficult to vote. Democrats wanted to make it as easy as conceivably possible to vote. And the problem is, it just was never true. Talk to political scientists about it. Like, if a poll of 1,500 people accurately summarizes the attitudes of 340 million Americans, what about a poll of 100 million people, right? I mean, it turns out that if everybody voted, most elections would look pretty much the way they did, electoral college stuff notwithstanding. Yeah. And I think, but the Democrats took from this idea, this baseline assumption, that they were always justified in anything that they did because they assumed that the people were on their side, and therefore they had a democratic sort of mandate, even if it wasn't reflected in elections as much as they would like. That's gone away now. I think there are a lot of Republicans who have this silent majority mindset that says the real America is with us, even if we lose elections. In fact, if we lose elections, that's proof the other side cheated.
Right.
And so there are different identity crises, different, corruptions of politics, but they're related to each other.
Let me ask you, as you are a solid Gen Xer, right? Mm-hmm. And, one of the hallmarks of being in Gen X was, recognizing that at best the world did not care about you and that you were on your own. And you helped, in at least two significant ways, and I'm undercounting it, but with you were the primary creator of National Review Online, which whatever people can say about the content of it, it provided the model for the first fully realized political magazine to have an online community, still up and going and things like that. So that's a great DIY Gen X and innovation. With people like Steve Hayes, also, I believe, a Gen Xer, you created the Dispatch, which, is, part of the Weekly Standard. I always think of it as like the Jimmy Cagney movie, Angels with Dirty Faces, where Pat O'Brien and Jimmy Cagney are being chased by cops at the very beginning. They're, I believe, in Hell's Kitchen, New York, where I'm calling from. And one of them gets caught by the cops and goes to reform school, becomes a hardened criminal. The other one becomes a Catholic priest. The Weekly Standard split between the Bulwark and the Dispatch. And I don't know who's Jimmy Cagney and who's Pat O'Brien, but but it represents a real DIY. Okay, nobody is going to build the institutions that we need now to take us into the future and to create community and identity. How much of what's going on in America is just that the old institutions are dying because institutions are like people and they have a lifespan and they die. And then the younger people, like you need to create new institutions or revitalize them. Is Gen X actually, apart from ideology, is Gen X just the generational energy that we need more of, that millennials and Zoomers need to start building their own institutions in the same way that, somebody like Bill Buckley in 1955 created National Review and a whole host of things that helped comprise the post-war right. Lanny Friedlander, the great, literally insane founder of Reason, created a magazine in 1968. You can look at the people who were behind Dissent magazine also in the 50s, and the New Republic in the 20s, etc. Is what we need more than anything is just more Gen X sensibility of like, what, if it's not out there, we're going to build it ourselves.
Uh, uh, it's funny. I hate generational analysis, but I agree entirely with the idea that Gen X is the best generation. And
I get a lot of that. Yeah.
To a certain extent, yes. So like when the change was happening, when the invasion of the body snatchers period in 2015, early 2016 was going on, the difference between me and Steve, we always used to joke about this, is that he had his ship blown out from under him. I had to sort of set fire to mine, right? And because the standard,
and by that you mean the Weekly Standard was shut down by its owner,
right?
Because it was seen as being too complicated or ambivalent about Trump.
That was part of it. It was also eaten for parts to boost the Washington Examiner. And I would say there were a couple of people from the Weekly Standard who didn't go Bulwark or Dispatch, but kind of went Trumpy. But that's neither here nor there. So when all of that was going on, part of it, the reason why I had been talking to Steve for a long time about how to try and save the Weekly Standard, and I had made the argument that there's an argument to start something new. Because there are things about the Standard that are liabilities, and there's this market space for something else. And so he was like, yeah, I know, I've been thinking about all that too, but I have a fiduciary obligation to try and save this institution and the jobs of my, people who are working for me. And he was right. And so we started calling, the other thing Plan B. And the Dispatch became Plan B when Plan A was not feasible. And part of the reason why, and I used to say this when we were trying to raise money for the thing, is that I checked a bunch of boxes for my career that was pretty proud of. National Review Online, created The Corner, wrote some best-selling books, syndicated columns, all that kind of stuff. Pretty happy with. I did feel like I hated being a burden to my friends at National Review, some of whom are still my closest friends. But like when you're that stridently taking a position that everyone else isn't about stuff about politics, you just the idea of people taking flack for you at an institution you love just is hard. But the main reason I did it was if you look at the people who I really admired on the right, the the chief one would be Irving Kristol, but also William F. Buckley and some. They were institution builders, and I mean, whatever I did for National Review Online, there were other people involved, and it wasn't my brand; it was a brand I was in service to, and I still probably wouldn't have done it, except we looked around and the people who were older than us, a lot of them were going Trumpy for interesting psychological and sociological reasons. Their last chance at the rodeo, or they were just at the end of the day partisan Republicans more than they were conservatives. And
can you name a name? Who is the worst or best example of that?
Well, I mean, I'll give you the example that pains me the most, only because I've talked about it before. I don't need to make any new enemies. I got plenty in the basket already, but I was really disappointed with Bill Bennett's reaction. I've been close friends with Bill Bennett. I love the guy personally. I haven't talked to him in 10 years. But you can't, and I had defended him when he was under fire for like the gambling stuff in Vegas, and I still will on the merits. But you can't talk about the death of outrage and the importance of virtue and all of these kinds of things and and then push comes to shove, say we have to rally around the president, right? But there are a bunch of people who are of a certain age. Newt Gingrich comes to mind, right? Newt Gingrich basically dismantled the best parts of his legacy as Speaker of the House. But for Newt, you don't get NAFTA. But for Newt, you don't get the Baltics in NATO. And he basically just said, those are all mistakes, just so his wife could be the ambassador to the Vatican or something. And
he's one of the strangest converts to Catholicism. I wouldn't have seen that coming.
So it's funny. True story. My dear late departed friend Kate O'Byrne, I believe, was his godmother. Brought him into the church, and she was. I hope I'm not speaking too much out of school. I love Kate dearly, but Kate said she was really worried about Newt becoming Catholic because within 6 months he was going to have a PowerPoint presentation about how to reorganize the Vatican. And so anyway, there weren't people building institutions, and this seemed like a moment. It was a new moment that required a new institution. And on the Gen X stuff, generally, one of the reasons why I half jokingly say it's the best generation is because we were the only ones who grew up more or less in the analog world, but we're young enough to make the transition to the digital world. And there are things about the pre-internet world that are wildly valuable and useful and good. And I don't mean this in some sort of pious, things were better when we were kids kind of thing. I'm sure you've seen something similar. The number of people right out of college who were terrified to cold call somebody is just amazing. It's like, I sent an email, like I have to wait for a response now. Like the idea of just calling someone out of the blue fills a lot of young people with terror when in fact that was our jobs growing up in a different generation. And there are a lot of those kinds of skills that I think young people today kind of need in order to succeed. And so anyway, you asked at the very beginning about the name of my podcast, The Remnant, and I just want to defend it for a second. First of all, it's a nod to Albert J. Nock, praise be upon him, and also Dwight McDonnell and all those guys. But it was David French who pointed it out to me, which I've really come to embrace, which is that in the biblical language, remnant has two connotations. One is the thing that's left behind, right? Hence a remnant, but also the thing that is the seed stock for the future. And I do think, our politics aren't going to be the same for a very long time, if ever, but they're never the same as they were, before. But I very much believe that classical liberal inflected conservatism or libertarianism, their days are not over. And in part because as much as the Yoram Hazonis and Patrick Deneen's and that crowd want to claim that America's association with liberalism is paper thin, because it's really just a bunch of false premises from John Locke. That's horseshit. This is just a liberal country. It's like any European who sees an American in Europe is like, that's an American, right? And regardless of what party they vote for, I try to always explain this to people is that there's a lot of the left that is pretty friggin' libertarian. It's just it's not coded. Say what you will about defund the police. I think it's incredibly stupid politics and stupid public policy, but it's pretty anarchist, right? It's pretty libertarian, right?
And the idea of, that fewer things should be illegal. It doesn't mean that people shouldn't speak out against them and things like that, but that the state should have fewer pretexts by which they can imprison you.
Right.
Yeah, pretty libertarian. And we will we'll end it here before whatever is going on, whatever new building in Mamdani's New York is going on 46th Street right now. This is one of the ways in which I am hopeful, and I want to just get your final comment on, political realignments that might be happening over the next couple of years. As you were saying, I think the Dispatch is more libertarian. I'm not claiming that you guys are libertarian, but there is, or more liberal in a classical sense the idea that government should be limited, it should pay for itself, it should,
Mhm.
restrict its actions and allow people more autonomy in their life. There is a huge amount of people on the left who believe that too.
Sure.
And I think libertarians, there are the hardcore super anarchists, which I'm not even sure are actually libertarian as opposed to something else. But they're within this, kind of libertarian, conservative, maybe liberal or as opposed to progressive left.
Mhm.
There seems to be, if not a majority, a plurality of people who can get along. Do you see in the midterms, which are looking like a bloodbath for the Republicans, and for the 28 election, which is, going to be wide open
Mhm.
in all sorts of ways, because you're not going to have a sitting president. There is no incumbent from the Democratic Party who's running or anything like that. Do you see, what are your hopes for a political realignment or a kind of shaking out of the odd decade plus that we've been embroiled in?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm going to tie it into your characterization of the dispatch. I think your description of it fits me perfectly,
Hmm.
fits Kevin Williamson for the most part,
Right.
right? And there are a few other people. But, part of the mission as an institution has less to do with the ideological side of these things and more to do with the idea that you can demonstrate that you can have a fact-driven news organization on the center right. That, and I think that the defining difference in some ways, like I often joke, there are a lot of great people at the Bulwark, like the Bulwark. But if Trump were to disappear tomorrow, it would be a crisis for what they do with themselves. And it would
Mhm.
be the best news possible for our model, right?
Right.
We always pitched ourselves as not so much anti-Trump as post-Trump. And
Right.
it's just that post-Trump Elysium is taking longer to get to. In terms of that centrist kind of that weird coalition in the middle, I agree with you entirely. Like I can have it's part of the reason why we do the dispatch is we just think facts matter, right? That arguments matter. Like you have to marshal facts and logic to persuade people, and and because I care about that stuff, I can have a better meaningful conversation with a lot of people on the center left, like Jonathan Rauch or somebody, than I can with a lot of people on the right, because a lot of people on the right think that, facts and arguments are for cucks and that you got
Yeah.
to just, power through. And I hate that crap in politics, whether it's from the left or the right. So I think that um, I think there is an opportunity. Like we the dispatch do not, the one thing we absolutely reject, and I reject in my core, is I've just given up on partisan water carrying. I have no sense that the Republicans are my team in any way, and that's very very liberating intellectually and journalistically in all sorts of ways. I think that there's going to be a lot more room for that post Trump, because the problem with Trump is, getting back to the stuff we were talking about at the beginning, is that he does, because he believes in bullshit rather than lies, right? Because he just thinks that he's got this, he wants, it's this personalist sort of Napoleon III kind of approach to government, that once he goes, like Vance doesn't have that kind of charisma. In Max Weber, there's this stuff about the bureaucratization of charisma, which is what happens when like Muhammad dies or Jesus dies, right? All of a sudden, the institutions that were built up around them have to figure out rules and rituals and customs and procedures, because no one has that kind of kinetic, relationship with the people. When Trump goes, that goes. And then the Vances are going to be left in a world where we're going to have to make arguments for their positions. And in that world, I think the stuff that you and I brought, where the Venn diagram between you and I overlaps, that's a better world for that, because it's not
Yeah.
about cult of personality stuff. It's about making arguments. And that's the only thing I really care about, is making arguments. And that's the world where Mike Pence is going to look better and JD Vance is going to look worse. I think there's a lot of institutions on the right, in the Koch universe and elsewhere, that are just waiting, right? Like when in 2016, we used to say, and we were wrong, oh, the laws of political gravity will eventually apply and Trump will come back down to earth. And what we got wrong was that laws of political gravity don't apply to Trump. He is a citizen of the laws of celebrity gravity.
Right.
Once the celebrity goes, you're left with a bunch of politicians, some of whom are really dumb or mean, or obnoxious, right? And who have to actually make arguments not based on bullying. And in that world, I think that's a great world for the sort of classical liberal, mainstream conservative, mainstream libertarian stuff, because those guys actually have good facts on this.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Jonah Goldberg of The Dispatch and many other things, including the podcast The Remnant. Thanks for talking to Reason.
Thanks for having me, man. It's good to be here.